All right, so this week we're going to be diving into a fascinating little news release that you sent over from the U.S. Department of Labor,
Yeah.
all about unemployment insurance claims.
Right.
And I know what you're thinking, a government report,
Yeah.
not exactly a page turner,
Uh-huh.
but trust me on this one. This has some clues about the economy and what it could mean for all of our wallets.
Oh.
So think of it like we're going on a treasure hunt sifting through the data
Right.
to find those golden nuggets of insight.
You like that.
Ready to join me?
Do it.
Okay, let's start with the headline. Unemployment claims went up to 217,000 for the week, ending January 11th, 2025.
Mm-hmm.
That's a jump of 14,000 from the week before.
Right.
So 14,000 new claims. That number jumps out at me.
Yeah.
Put this in context for us. What should we be reading into this change?
I think to make sense of it, we need to zoom out a bit.
Okay.
A jump like this isn't necessarily a time to hit the panic button.
Okay.
What's important is where it fits within the larger trends.
So how does this compare to, say, past years or other economic signals?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
A jump of 14,000 sounds big,
Right.
but historically speaking, it falls within a fairly normal range.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it like the stock market.
Okay.
Some days are up, some are down.
Yeah.
But the real story is in the long-term direction.
Okay. That's reassuring.
Yeah.
But speaking of ups and downs, I always struggle to wrap my head around seasonal adjustments.
Yeah.
I mean, can you explain why they matter? Maybe using an example that resonates with you?
Sure. Imagine a beach town.
Okay.
Summertime, everyone's hiring lifeguards,
Right.
ice cream scoopers. All those seasonal jobs.
Mhm.
Come fall, those jobs disappear.
Yeah.
Not because the town's economy is tanking,
Right.
but because it's the natural cycle.
Right, right.
So seasonal adjustments are like taking those predictable swings into account.
Okay.
So we're not mistaking a seasonal dip for like a full-blown economic downturn.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it helps us separate the signal from the noise?
Precisely. In this case, even with those adjustments, we still see a rise in claims.
Okay.
That tells us there's something more going on than just the usual post-holiday slowdown.
Okay, so we've got the big picture numbers.
Right.
But this report also breaks down the data by state.
Mm-hmm.
And some states are seeing much higher rates than others.
Yeah.
For example, for the week ending December 28th, 2024, New Jersey had a rate of 2.9%, while Florida was at a much lower 0.3%.
Wow.
Wow, New Jersey at 2.9 versus Florida at 0.3.
That's a huge difference.
That's a stark contrast. What's driving this?
It's a combination of factors.
Oh.
Think of it like this. Each state has its own economic personality.
Okay.
Some, like New Jersey,
Sure.
have a lot of industries that are very sensitive to economic ups and downs, like manufacturing or construction.
Right.
When things slow down nationally, those states tend to feel it more acutely.
So their economic structure makes them more vulnerable.
Exactly.
Okay.
Whereas a state like Florida, with its focus on tourism and hospitality, might bounce back more quickly.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And to add even more color, the report actually includes comments from some states explaining what they think is behind their changes in claims.
Mm-hmm.
For example, New York mentioned layoffs in transportation construction and food services as factors behind their increase.
Right, right.
What's your take on these insights straight from the states themselves?
I think those comments can be incredibly valuable.
Okay.
They give us a glimpse into what's happening on the ground, the real-world stories behind the numbers.
Yeah.
In New York's case, it suggests there might be some broader challenges brewing in those specific sectors.
Okay.
It's a bit like a canary in a coal mine. Those layoffs could be early indicators of wider trends.
Okay, so maybe not just a New York thing then.
Right.
But this report goes even deeper, breaking down claims into different categories like regular state programs, federal employees, newly discharged veterans.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're giving us all these different lenses to examine the job market.
Absolutely.
Right.
And each lens reveals something unique.
For example, if we see a spike in claims among federal employees, it could point to budget cuts or policy changes at the government level.
Right.
A rise in claims from veterans might signal challenges they face transitioning to civilian jobs.
Uh-huh.
These details help us understand who exactly is being impacted and why.
So it's not just about the overall number, it's about understanding the nuances within those numbers.
Exactly.
This is fascinating.
Yeah.
But before we get too lost in the weeds, let's switch gears and talk about what happens after someone files a claim.
Okay.
The report also looks at continued weeks claimed,
Right.
which tells us how long people are staying on unemployment benefits after their initial claim.
Exactly.
Right.
It's a measure of how long it takes people to find new jobs after being laid off.
Okay.
And that duration can tell us a lot about the health of the job market as a whole.
So what does this metric tell us about the current situation? Is it easy or difficult for folks to get back on their feet?
Well, for the week ending December 28th, 2024, the report shows that the total number of continued weeks claimed across all programs was 2,213,431.
So over 2 million people are still relying on unemployment benefits. To get a sense of scale, how does that compare to recent weeks or maybe the same time last year? Is this a high number?
It's definitely up from the previous week, an increase of 327,136.
Okay.
And it's higher than the 2,127,781 claims filed during the same week in 2023.
So both initial claims and continued claims are on the rise.
Yeah.
That does paint a bit of concerning picture, doesn't it?
It's certainly something to watch closely.
Yeah.
An increase in continued claims could suggest that the job market isn't as robust as we might think based on the headline unemployment rate alone.
Okay.
It could mean people are having trouble finding new jobs that match their skills or pay.
Right. It's not just about whether any jobs exist, but whether they're good jobs.
Yeah.
Jobs that offer stability and a decent living.
Exactly. And that's why this data is so valuable. It gives us a much more nuanced view than we get from just glancing at the unemployment rate.
Absolutely. We've gone pretty deep into the weeds here, but I think it's been really illuminating. Now let's take a step back from all the data and try to connect it all together. What's the overall narrative these numbers are telling us about the U.S. economy in early 2025?
Well, the rise in both initial and continued unemployment claims does suggest some potential softening in the labor market.
Okay.
It's not necessarily a sign of an imminent recession,
Okay.
but it's a yellow flag that warrants attention.
So a reason to be cautious, but not necessarily panicked.
Exactly.
Okay.
The economy is a complex system,
Right.
and these numbers are just one piece of the puzzle.
Sure.
But they do provide valuable insights into the health of the job market and the challenges many Americans are facing.
I agree. Data like this helps us move beyond those often simplistic narratives we see in the headlines and get a more grounded understanding of what's really happening in the economy.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that behind those numbers are real people whose lives and livelihoods are directly impacted by these trends.
Okay, so we've gone deep into these unemployment claims, and it turns out they're not just numbers. They're a window into the lives and livelihoods of people across the country.
And as with any window, it provides a limited view.
Right.
The report gives us a snapshot of the current situation, but it doesn't necessarily predict the future.
Right. There are always factors at play that might not be fully captured in the data.
For example, the report doesn't delve into the impact of automation and AI on the job market, something we're seeing increasingly discussed in the news.
Yeah,
Could this be a factor influencing the data, even if it's not explicitly mentioned?
that's a great point.
Yeah.
It's definitely something to keep an eye on. The evolving nature of work is bound to have an impact on these numbers.
And that raises the question,
Yeah.
how do we prepare for a future where certain jobs may become obsolete while new ones emerge?
Right.
It's a complex challenge that requires proactive thinking and policy solutions.
Indeed. So even though we've unpacked a lot here today, this deep dive has actually opened up even more questions for us to consider.
And that's the beauty of knowledge, isn't it?
Oh,
The
yeah.
more we learn, the more we realize how much more there is to explore.
Well said. I think you've given our listener a lot to think about. Keep those brains buzzing, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Sounds good.
Uh,
Certainly has. But before we wrap up, I
Yeah.
think there's one more crucial point to pull out from all of this, this report.
okay.
It's filled with numbers, the percentages, trends.
Right.
But what it doesn't capture are the individual experiences behind those data points.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the big picture and forget that each one of those claims represents a person, a family dealing with a very real challenge.
Exactly. Imagine it.
Yes.
Each of those 217,000 initial claims,
Right.
that's someone who's suddenly lost their job, their primary source of income.
hmm
They're facing uncertainty, stress, maybe even having tough conversations about how to make ends meet.
And those continued claims, those are the folks who are still searching week after week, hoping for that opportunity to get back on their feet.
Right. It's a reminder that these economic indicators, they're not just abstract figures on a page.
Yeah.
They're tied to the lives and livelihoods of real people across the country.
It's like you can analyze the trends, the data,
Mm-hmm.
but without that human element, you're missing a huge part of the story.
Absolutely. And I think that's something for all of us to remember, whether we're policymakers, business leaders, or just everyday citizens.
Right.
These trends impact people, families, communities.
So as we move forward, whether we're talking about this report or other economic news, it's crucial to keep that human impact in mind.
I agree. And it's not just about empathy.
Oh,
It's about understanding the ripple effects.
okay.
If more people are struggling to find work, it impacts consumer spending, local businesses, even the tax base for public services. It's all interconnected.
It really highlights how these economic trends aren't just statistics, they're shaping the fabric of our society.
Precisely. And that brings us to a really important question.
Okay.
How do we build a more resilient economy? One that can better withstand these kinds of shocks and provide more security for workers?
That's a big question. Where do we even begin to address something like that?
Well, it starts with awareness,
Okay.
with understanding the challenges and the complexities.
Mm-hmm.
Reports like this one are a good starting point,
Right.
but they're only one piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
We need to look beyond the data, talk to people on the ground,
Mhm.
explore different perspectives and potential solutions.
So it's about going beyond just analyzing what is and starting to think about what could be.
Exactly. It requires creativity, collaboration, and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
It's about asking ourselves, how can we create an economy that works for everyone, not just a select few?
That's a powerful thought. So even though we've unpacked a lot here today, this deep dive has actually opened up even more questions for us to consider.
And that's the beauty of it all, isn't it? The more
Yeah.
we learn, the more we realize how much more there is to explore.
Well said. You've given our listener a lot to ponder, that's for sure.
I hope so, because ultimately this information is most valuable when it sparks conversations, inspires action, and helps us all navigate the complexities of the world around us.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. We've delved deep into the data, explored the complexities of the job market, and hopefully gained a more nuanced understanding of what these unemployment claims really tell us. But more importantly, we've been reminded that behind those numbers are real people whose lives are directly impacted by these trends.
So to our listener, as you continue to follow the economic news and hear about these unemployment figures, remember the human stories behind them.
Mm-hmm.
It's a perspective that can inform our understanding and inspire us to advocate for policies that support a more equitable and resilient economy.
Keep those brains buzzing, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.
Yeah, it's so easy to get lost in the numbers, and forget about the human impact.
Absolutely. And this report is just one snapshot in time, and it raises so many more
Well,
questions. Well, we've talked about how each state has its own economic personality.
right.
But what about the people within those states?
Okay.
What factors make some individuals or communities more vulnerable to job loss than others?
That's a great point. It's like layers upon layers, right? We can
Yeah.
zoom in from the national level to the state level and there even further to the individual level. And at each level, there are unique stories and circumstances to consider.
Precisely. And those individual stories can often reveal the gaps in our existing safety net.
Okay.
Are unemployment benefits enough to truly support people while they're looking for work?
Right.
Are retraining programs accessible and effective for those whose jobs have become obsolete?
Yeah.
These are the kinds of questions we need to grapple with if we want to create a more resilient and equitable workforce.
I think this deep dive has really highlighted how economics isn't just about abstract theories and data points.
Mhm.
It's about people's lives. It's about understanding the forces that shape their opportunities and their well-being. You put it perfectly. And that understanding should inform our actions, both individually and collectively.
Right?
We can all do our part by supporting policies that promote job creation, invest in education and training, and strengthen the social safety net.
So it's not just about crunching the numbers, it's about using that knowledge to advocate for positive change.
Exactly. And it's about having those tough conversations,
Yeah.
even when they're uncomfortable, because that's how we start to bridge the gap between data and lived experience.
Well, you've certainly given us a lot to think about today. I feel like this deep dive has not only shed light on the current state of the economy, but also opened up a whole new set of questions and challenges for us to explore.
And that's what makes this so fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Economics is constantly evolving, just like the world around us.
Right.
There's always more to learn, more to understand, and more to do.
So to our listener, we encourage you to keep digging deeper, to question assumptions, and to engage in these crucial conversations about the future of work and the well-being of our communities.
Keep those brains buzzing, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.
Thanks for joining